This is the new 2022 Range Rover, and it's the latest version of the most famous luxury SUV in the world. It's not often that a new Range Rover comes out. It's been a decade since the last one, but the new one is here, and today I'm going to take you on a thorough tour of it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can list your car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Porsche 911 GT3 RS in RS Green, which brought over $230,000. This fantastic BMW M3 E92 Lime Rock Edition, which brought almost $60,000, and this wonderful Toyota Corolla hatchback with a Honda S2000 engine swap, which brought almost $20,000. If you're looking to buy or sell an enthusiast car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it, with great selection and daily auctions at carsandbids.com. So let's talk Range Rover. The original came out more than 50 years ago, and it's always been something of a luxury off-roader, but it's become especially luxury in recent years, adding new technology and features and equipment and a long wheelbase body style with some amazing amenities. The new Range Rover comes out for 2022, the first all-new model since 2013. And while it looks somewhat similar on the outside, it is completely redesigned, especially inside, which I'll show you. Now, pricing will start around $105,000, and two engines will be available from launch: a 400 horsepower six-cylinder or a 525 horsepower twin-turbo V8 with a plug-in hybrid on the way soon. And today, I'm going to show you around the new Range Rover. I won't be able to drive this one because it's a pre-production model and it's not drivable yet, but I can take you on a thorough tour and show you all the quirks and features of the new Range Rover before it goes on sale this spring. So let's get started. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the new Range Rover by discussing seating. And so I'm going to start in the back. You open up the tailgate and you quickly discover a third row seat back here. This is a big deal. This is the first Range Rover ever to have three-row seating. Now, they're not standard, and in fact, the third row is only even available if you get the long wheelbase Range Rover. You can't get the third row with the regular wheelbase. But the point is, it's here finally. Three-row seating in a full-size Range Rover, and that's a big deal. But I will get back to the third row in a second. That's not the seat I want to focus on right now. I want to talk tailgate seat. You can see right now I have the tailgate up, but there's still a lower piece in place. Press this little button here and it folds down automatically, and then you can sit back here, which is pretty cool. You've been able to do that in Range Rovers for a long time. Have a little picnic or a tailgate in your Range Rover. But they've made it better with the new model. You can now lift up this panel behind the tailgate seat and have a backrest, which makes it more comfortable and easier to enjoy your tailgate seat. You can see this backrest locks into place and you can lean back on it, and it's pretty comfortable back here, more so than in prior Range Rover models. And there's more to it than just a backrest. For one thing, you have little cup holders on either side of the tailgate seat. You can see, so you're sitting back here tailgating and you have a place for your drinks. And on the inside of the upper tailgate, you have these little LED lights. You can tap, turn them on, and then you have some extra lighting back here while you're sitting back here and enjoying whatever it is you want to do from the back of your Range Rover, which is pretty cool. And it gets even better because your tailgate seat backrest can fold the other way as well. Unlock it, fold it down, and then lift it up from the other side, and you can see there are like these straps on it. Those are for cargo. You can stick stuff in there if you don't want it rolling around in the back, and they're adjustable adjustable. You can adjust exactly how large you want these straps to be. So if you're carrying like wine bottles or soft drinks or milk, whatever, you can adjust the straps to fit exactly what you're carrying and it won't roll around. And this panel with the straps can also be used as a cargo divider. You can see it sits up in the cargo area to keep whatever you have back here separate, which is pretty useful. Now, it's easier to see how that functions with the third row down, and fortunately, that is pretty easy to do because it's all power operated back here. You just press these little switches and the third row automatically goes down, retreats flat into the cargo area, and then you have a pretty big cargo space back here where you can throw stuff if you don't need to use the third row. And yes, you can see the cargo divider sticking up in the middle if you want it to keep your cargo separate. Now, power folding third row seats, not really all that special. A lot of luxury SUVs have that, but we are nowhere near done with the cool stuff you can do from the back of the Range Rover. For one, you can automatically fold down the second row of seats as well. These switches here above the third row switches, you press those and then the second row will automatically fold down. And more importantly, it will also fold back up automatically with these switches. And of course, the third row will as well. So you can control everything back here. Put the second row down, put the third row down, put them both back up, all independent, whatever you want to do, all controlled here. And there are still more controls above that. One of them has an image of a trailer with a light. Now, when you press that, the exterior lights of the Range Rover start doing this bizarre dance. Watch them. They're turning on and off at sort of random intervals, left, right, the brake lights, the reverse lights. It seems to make no sense. It's like the car is completely confused, like it's having some electrical problem. Actually, this is a trailer brake light check. So once you've hooked up a trailer, you press that and it will illuminate all these lights so you can test and see if all the lights are working just from the push of a button back there, which is pretty cool. And other interesting controls here. For one, you can raise or lower the suspension from back here. So if you have some really heavy item you don't want to lift all the way in, drop the suspension and it makes it easier to get it inside. You also have a button here marked 4 with a seat and arrow pointing down. You press that and all 4 power seats will go down at once to give you an immediately flat load floor so you can put larger items in here pretty easily. But anyway, next up, since I'm talking seats, let's get into that new third row and look around. But before I do that, obviously I have to unlock the doors. Now right now they're locked, and you can tell because the door handles are flush against the body of the car, which looks cool. Like a lot of cars, when you unlock the doors, the door handles pop out. And Land Rover told me, this is completely true, Land Rover told me their door handle poppers have the strongest motor in the entire car industry. Which may sound ridiculous, but if you're using this car in icy conditions, you don't want the door handles to freeze stuck closed. And so a very strong door handle popper motor is actually important to make sure they can break through ice so you can always get access to your Range Rover. But anyway, once you get the door open, getting access to the third row is rather easy. There's no latch you pull and then throw the seat forward. It's all more elegant than that. There's this little arrow button next to the seat. You press that and the seat automatically moves forward to clear a path so that you can get into the third row. All very luxurious and very electronic. No effort is required on your part at all. But the cool thing here is you can see the seat keeps its shape even when it goes forward. And that way, if you have a car seat or a seat base in there, you don't have to move that stuff out of the way and deal with some folding seat. It all just stays put. But anyway, now that the seat is forward, I can easily climb into the third row. It's a bit of a big step because of the ground clearance here, but once you get back here, well, here I am. Now I'm in the third row. Not huge back here, but certainly big enough. You could put an adult back here for a shorter drive, or obviously kids will be pretty happy in the back. Now, the cool thing back here is just the sheer amount of amenities even in the third row. For one thing, you can see power ports, USB-C on either side in the third row. You also have cup holders back here, again, individual on either side in the third row. More useful, the third row has its own set of arrow buttons, again, on either side. Press that, and And the second row will automatically fold forward once again, so you don't have to reach all the way up here. You got your own buttons in back to make it easier to get in and out of the third row. And the third row in this new Range Rover even has heated seats, heated third row seats, which is a surprise. It wasn't that long ago that heated second row seats were a big deal. Well, now they've moved it to the third row. That is luxury. And by the way, speaking of climate control with the heated seats, you do have individual climate vents back here for the third row too, one for each seat, which also helps to add to the comfort of the third row passengers. But anyway, next up we move back outside the new Range Rover, and before I close the door, I want to put the second row seat back in its spot, so I just press the other arrow button, and you can see the seat automatically retreats back to where it normally lives in the second row, which is pretty good and pretty luxurious. But anyway, you close the door, and I want to talk design of this new Range Rover because there are some interesting details on the outside of this car. Now, probably the most notable item with the design of the new Range Rover is it doesn't really look that different from the old one, which is a surprise because the old one came out almost 10 years ago, and you'd think things would have changed a lot since then. But from one perspective, the old one was beautiful when it came out. It's still beautiful, and so it makes sense to just evolve it a little bit. Now, personally, I'm a little disappointed. I wanted a totally new revolutionary Range Rover rather than an evolution, but this is what we've gotten instead. With that said, there have been some noticeable changes to the new Range Rover, and Land Rover tells me the most obvious is a focus on simplicity. Rather than a garish, ostentatious display of wealth, simplicity. And there are several good examples of that on the outside. For one, how about this line where the window meets the body on the door panel? There's no weather stripping here. This doesn't seem like a big deal, but go look at most other cars. They have weather stripping here, and it certainly isn't as attractive. Removing it, again, it's all about simplicity, minimalism in the new Range Rover. That's also true if you look at badging. This is the top of the line autobiography long wheelbase model, but you wouldn't know that from looking at badges on this car. You have autobiography in only one place, right here at the base of the front door. That's it. It doesn't say autobiography in back to brag about the trim level. Very subtle on the side. And it only says long wheelbase in one place. This little black L badge on the back door and the window, that's it. A subtle hint that you have the long wheelbase version. Again, not mentioned in back, not thrown in your face, all about simplicity and subtlety with the new Range Rover. And then there's the back. The rear end of the new Range Rover has undoubtedly been the most controversial part, but you can see the look easily fits into the overall theme. No excessive badging back here, very elegant, very simple. In fact, it almost looks like this doesn't have any tail lights or brake lights at all because they've done such a good job simplifying everything. But indeed, it does have brake lights. They're over here on the side, these long vertical panels. They also contain the turn signal. You can see lights up when you put on the turn signal and overrides the brake lights. And Land Rover tells me these are the brightest rear LEDs in the entire car industry. They have to be in order to push through this black covering over them that helps to add to the simplicity in the rear end of the Range Rover. And Land Rover's done a good job hiding some other usual items in the back too. For instance, the reverse lights have been hidden in the bumper, integrated with some reflectors down there. You'd never even really know they're there, and they don't have to disturb the simplistic rear end. Also, the rear wiper is not really visible from behind the car. This is an old Range Rover trick. It's hidden here underneath the spoiler, but when it's off, you can't tell it's there at all, and it helps clean up the rear end. Again, a focus on simplicity. And finally, since we're talking design and style, a few other items on the outside of the car. One is the wheels. The new Range Rover comes standard with 21-inch wheels. These are 23-inch wheels, the largest wheels ever fitted to a Range Rover. 23s. Wheels have gotten absolutely huge. Another interesting item on the side, you can see this silver piece back here at the end of this line down the side of the car. You might be wondering what that is. I asked Land Rover and they said it is purely for style, sort of a finisher at the back just to make it look a little nicer. Also interesting on the side, this lower panel is painted black, and Land Rover told me it will be black for all Range Rover models regardless of what color you get. They said the The intent here is to add a little bit of visual lift, make the car look a little taller, a little more intimidating with this black painted panel on the side. Kind of interesting. Also, one other item on the outside, the shark fins, plural because there's two of them, two rear shark fins. Apparently one is no longer enough in today's world of all sorts of features and equipment inside. And next up we climb inside. I'm going to start with the second row, which I must say is very nice. Very roomy, even with the third row now installed in these vehicles. You still have a ton of space back here to sit back, relax, lie down in the beautiful Range Rover. Now, a few interesting items back here. For one, the seat control. You can see it's on the door in the shape of a seat. A lot of cars have that. The cool part is the memory buttons are integrated into the seat control itself. You can see memory 1, 2, 3 actually on the seat control, and there's an example of that simplicity once again. You don't have to have extra memory buttons, you just integrate them into buttons that are already there. Now, speaking of controls on the door panel, you can see there are quite a few in here, including a window switch, although this isn't just any window switch. Right above the switch, there's a button that allows you to choose which window your switch is controlling, and you can control both of them at once. So you can highlight both windows in this button and then press your switch and roll down both rear windows at once, or roll them both back up at once, which is pretty cool to be able to do that with the push of one button. Now, the rear window switch also controls the rear sunshade. You can pull up on the switch and then the sunshade will go up, which will keep the sun away. You have other buttons in here that have other functions. One is another sunshade that will close or open the overhead sunshade over the panoramic sunroof if you want to keep the sun out or let it in. You also have controls here for your reading lights, which is relatively useful right next to your hand. Next up, a few other interesting things back here. For one, you have lighted seatbelt buckles. It's hard to see them in the day, but very useful at night. You open the door and the buckles are lighted to make it easier to see where you have to stick your seatbelt, so you're not just rooting around there trying to find it. You also have rear seat climate controls back here, which of course are very nice, very useful right here in the middle, and they have a clever function. These little wheels you turn to adjust your climate control temperature. If you push them in, they change and let you turn on the heated or cooled seats back here, which is pretty neat. Push them again and you can go back to adjusting your climate control temperature. Again, all about simplicity. No extra button for heated seats. It's just integrated into these wheels you already have. And next up, the Range Rover. Even though it's a luxury car and an off-roader, it is also a large, practical family vehicle, and so it has an enormous number of charge ports. You can see a few back here under the rear seat climate controls. There's several different charge ports to choose from, but that's not all. You drop the center armrest, you open up this compartment, and there's even more charge ports back here. You'll never be without ports to charge your devices. Now, in this compartment, you can also see HDMI ports where you can plug in stuff that you can use to then watch on your screens. You can see large screens mounted on the backs of the front seats for the rear passengers. When you don't have anything plugged into the port, they don't really do much. They can show you navigation and you can control some settings, but there's not that much to them unless you plug in your HDMI, which is a little bit of a disappointment. Some modern cars have built-in apps in these rear screens. You can watch all sorts of stuff, but not the new Range Rover. And next up, we move up front in the new Range Rover. And the first thing you notice when you climb in here is it is beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous everything in here. You got aluminum, gorgeous trim everywhere, wood on the door panels, nice design. Everything looks great, feels great, and is great up here. And of course, there's leather everywhere, although there doesn't have to be. Land Rover is offering the new Range Rover with a non-leather interior option for people who want to go vegan with their car. You can have a more renewable energy focused, non-leather, non-animal interior, which is a pretty cool idea. Now, probably my very favorite material up here is this wood in the center console, this unfinished wood, beautiful to look at, nice to touch, and you can see it's inlaid with these little metal lines, which is a gorgeous design, starts up front and carries through to the center of this wood trim in the center console. A very, very beautiful look up here. Also a nice luxury touch in this interior, the headrests, they move to contour perfectly to your head, like you might find at an airplane, which is nice. And they have built-in speakers, which Land Rover tells me are designed to cancel out ambient noise. So as quiet and luxurious as this car is, there's speakers next to your ears that make it even quieter by canceling out the sounds of the world. But anyway, next up, moving back to the center, this is where your start-stop button is to turn on or off the new Range Rover, and it's also where your volume button is to adjust the stereo, and you have one more interesting dial here. You push this little circle, it pops out, and then you can twist it to adjust your drive modes. You can select like which terrain you're on, and you can see the different modes selecting in the center screen based on your turning the dial. And when you're done off-roading, just push it right back in and it goes back into automatic mode where it'll detect which terrain you're on and you don't have to select it manually. But let's go back to that center screen for a second. This is a larger screen than what you had in the prior Range Rover, and as a result, everything's just bigger and a little bit easier to use and more intuitive, except it doesn't accept touch inputs anymore. It now requires a full push. It's like a haptic feedback thing where it has to kind of vibrate when you tap it so you know you've tapped it, which is a little disappointing because you got to push down harder on everything in order to make it work, which frankly I don't really like. You can adjust the haptic sensitivity so you don't have to push down that hard, but still no touchscreen functionality here, which is kind of a disappointment. However, there are some rather cool things you can do in this center screen, including turn on the heated seats for the entire interior. You can even turn on your third row heated seats on this front screen, which is interesting. And speaking of seats, you can also use this screen to fold down all of your rear seats. You just tap here and they start to fold, which is a really cool touch. Means you don't have to climb out of the car and go fold the seats down if someone coming up to the car wants to load something in. You can do it all here. And there's even a chauffeur mode in this screen. You tap that and the driver has the ability to tap here in order to automatically slide the front passenger seat all the way forward to give the rear chauffeured passenger more legroom. Pretty nice. Also worth noting with this screen, you get this nice 3D camera system, which is pretty cool. You can see all around the car, basically every angle. It makes it easier to park or maneuver around in tight spaces, which is nice to have. Overall, this center screen is relatively intuitive, easy to use. I just wish it didn't have that haptic thing where you have to push down so hard in order to do stuff. A touchscreen is just so much simpler and more familiar to most people using your phones. And by the way, although the new Range Rover is mostly a luxury vehicle, it is still a very capable off-roader, and there are some excellent off-road features, like for instance wade sensing, which you can see here. You can take the new Range Rover up to 32 inches of water, and sensors on the outside of the car can tell exactly how much water you're in and let you know on your infotainment screen, which is pretty cool. You also have locking differentials here, as you can see, and Land Rover's terrain response system, which I mentioned before. You can select the type of terrain you're on, and the Range Rover will tailor its driving to maximize its capability on that terrain. And next up, a few other items worth noting. For one thing, the center console. This is an armrest, of course, but you can lift it up and there's a cooler in here you can turn on to keep drinks or sandwiches cool while you're driving along, which is kind of a nice touch. Also worth noting, this wood trim I mentioned in the center console, you can pull it back and reveal cup holders in the back and a little storage area in front, which is obviously nice to have. And speaking of storage, you have a dual glove box in here. These little buttons up and down open your upper and lower glove boxes. As you can see, just press them and they'll open right up. Also interesting in this vicinity is this front quarter window, which you can see is smaller than it should be because of this Meridian speaker mounted underneath. It's kind of a weird thing, the speaker making that window smaller, and the speaker looks kind of cheap, which is weird because the rest of the speakers are so beautiful. But this one right on your line of sight, strangely placed and really not all that attractive. Now, the last thing I want to discuss in here is the gauge cluster screen. Directly behind the steering wheel, you can see a screen, and it is quite configurable. You have several different options for how you want information displayed. You can have a full screen map on here, and you can show all sorts of different things. It's one of the better gauge cluster screens in the car industry. Very useful, very configurable, and very easy to use. And speaking of using it, it's controlled with these steering wheel buttons that change based on what screen you're on in the gauge cluster. You can can see right now the buttons show one thing, but if you go into a different screen, the buttons change and show something else corresponding to what's actually on the screen, which is kind of a neat touch. And finally, we move under the hood in the new Range Rover, and this one, being an Autobiography L model, has the big engine, which is a twin-turbo V8 with about 525 horsepower. Not that it matters, because I won't be driving this Range Rover since it's a pre-production car. But anyway, the base engine in the new Range Rover is a straight 6 with about 400 horsepower, and there's also a plug-in hybrid powertrain coming soon. Now, since I'm around front, might as well mention the front-end styling also looks fairly similar to the outgoing model, although you do have a new grille up here, and you can see a pretty simple look, just like what you have in the rest of the new Range Rover. And so that's the new Range Rover. The Range Rover is an icon, an amazing ultra-luxury SUV with some fantastic amenities and capabilities, and the new one looks like a hit. I can't wait to drive the new Range Rover before it reaches dealers sometime this spring.